Welcome back to Invent and Repeat. Glad to see you here. So what we're talking about today is rebuilding this old Isarmatic plow pump. So if this is your first time here, make sure you like the video, comment, tell us what you think, tell us what you want to hear about, and subscribe. We got a lot of great content coming out, a lot of great content on the channel, so be sure to check it out. So why are we doing this today? Because this is an old pump. I actually got it off eBay. The data tag is not there anymore. It still has a part number on it. It doesn't give me an actual build date on it. But a lot of this stuff is pretty darn old. I mean, we got a 912 on the motor, so the motor is at least from 2012. But I believe this is a late 80s, early 90s pump assembly because we are using the electronic solenoids versus the cable-driven pump. But it's still the one-unit housing for a Western plow assembly. So we still got the motor, lift ram, hydraulic pump is inside this reservoir right here. Hydraulic solenoids run the lines and the ram itself. So this year, getting it ready, we've noticed some problems. The base mounting point gasket, that O-ring is leaking. This ram has always been pitted since I got it. So with the pitting, it allows a lot of fluid to leak past the seals when this ram is operating up and down. Before, I just never had time to worry about it, but now we're gonna actually take that out and replace it. Along with this motor, it's getting old because obviously it's 2012, so this is a 12-year-old motor. So we want to make sure it doesn't break down on this season. And we're going to do a refresh, kind of rebuild everything, get the fluid changed, and get it ready for this new season. So the first thing I did was drain the fluid out when it was still on the truck, which is just done by a drain plug that's on the bottom of the pump itself. Just on the bottom of the housing, it takes an Allen wrench. It's a 1/4-inch pipe thread, just on the very bottom edge. You just take that out. And I always like to loosen the fill, just so it helps drain out faster. And that is how we started to get the fluid out of this, so it's not making a mess on us while we're on here, but I've got my tray to catch it if it goes that route. So we're going to show you how it's done right here. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to replace this lift ram first. While this motor is still on here, it gives me some extra leverage to grab onto stuff and help flop it around, since we're doing this off of the truck. If we were on the truck, the bottom base would pretty much hold it in place, so we wouldn't have to worry about it. But we're going to start by taking this gland nut and unscrewing it. So a giant adjustable wrench is pretty handy. You can do it with a pipe wrench or any kind of big pliers. It shouldn't be on too tight if it hasn't been sealed on there, because it is supposed to be adjustable and you're supposed to be able to tighten it and loosen it for pressure on the seal of this lift ram, because you don't actually want to cram this down too tight, because otherwise this ram will not actually retract when the plow goes in the float position. So we're going to get that nut off, and then we should be able to pull this out with all the packing, and we can repack it and then put it back together with a new ram. So you can see right here, we got our giant wrench. We're just gonna make it big, get it on there, and then, all right, it came apart pretty easy, so that's nice. So off to the side. Because on this nut itself is the actual wipe seal that actually keeps all the fluid in, because you still have your packing in there holding the ram together. And this just holds the wipe seal that keeps all the fluid in. Comes right out across the top, just like that. You can see the wipe seal in there. It's got a bunch of crud pulling out of it, and it's actually got quite a bit of dirt, but it's actually coming apart too. The lip is gone, so that's also why it wasn't holding the fluid. And I'll just bring this up nice and slow. We'll open up the vent because it's got pressure on it because we're pulling the seal open. Set that off to the side. But you can see on here all the pitting that's on this ram. It comes out just like that. Come on, there we go. So you can see all that pitting on there. That's what was allowing fluid to go through the seal and not allow a good seal on here. You can see all the other seals on here. They're looking okay, but they're definitely old. They've got some wear on them, so that's what we're looking at right here. And we'll put a new ram on there, it'll be good to go. So now that we got the ram out, we ran into our first problem. For this pump, for having the electronic solenoid block on it, it should have this style ram, because in this style ram, the bottom end is different. See how all these spacers, there's supposed to be one individual ring. You see that gap that's on there? There's supposed to be a split washer that goes around that fills in the gap. That's what's supposed to be riding on the surface for supporting inside here for better weight distribution and bearing surface. But when I pulled it apart, it actually had this old style where it just has the one washer, and see how it's just one small split ring? And that one small washer does all the load bearing surface, then you got your packing on top of it. So, because when I ordered the kit, I ordered packing and everything, I tried to get that split washer for it, just because I wanted to make sure I had it just in case it would wear out. But at the time, I couldn't find one. It's really hard to find some of this older stuff like that, and I couldn't get that split washer, because even though I had the part number, I just couldn't find it. I said, well, I was kind of running short on time. I was like, well, that's fine. It's probably got one in it. It's going to be fine. It's not a big deal. But obviously, it's either interchangeable, which I know they're interchangeable. That means either this pump body is an older cable style and they just swapped out for the valve block, or it is the right one and they just put the wrong ram in because they couldn't find this split ring, or this is cheaper anyways. So they went this route. So I'm going to put this style back in, which is not a problem. I did have to take this ram and pillage it out of one of my backup plow trucks to get us up and running, because this is on my primary truck. And I replaced this ram a couple years ago, so I'm going to use this one. It only has a couple small nicks. That's the way it came from the factory for me. So we're going to replace the packing. It's going to use the same washer that we had before, but I'm just going to put new packing and put a new wipe seal in the outer nut. This is what the packing kit comes and looks like. You can see they are automatically set in order. They are taped together so you do not mix up the order. And then this white seal right here is the actual wipe seal that goes in the nut itself. So the way you do it, you just take these, slide them off the top. Goes right off the top of the ram just like that. Make sure you kind of keep them in order, because it does matter on which way they go when you put them back in. So we're going to clean this all up, take these packings, slide them back down here, and then we're going to insert this back in the ram, same way it came out. And I'll show you about how to get the wipe seal out of this. So now here I got all the new packing on there just like it was before. So I did put a little bit of grease on the inside when I put it on the shaft. It does help it get it started on there a little bit better. And it does help start with the initial life so they don't wear out and dry out when you first put it back together. So grease is always your friend. And before I put this in there, I'll obviously grease the outside when I insert it, so that way it is ready to go. So I'm going to put it off where it's clean. Now the nut itself, you see on the outer edge right there where it's all in the dirt, that is the wipe seal itself. So you just take a small pick, screwdriver, whatever, just kind of get it in there and pick it out. It's probably going to come apart in pieces or break, but it peels out just like that. And that's all there is to it. You can see all these edges right there are broke off. It's supposed to be a nice clean surface all the way around. This is directional, so it has that lip that's on there. That is towards the out, so that would be towards the top, just like this. So it is directional. When you put it back in, you got to put it back in a certain way. But this is what a wipe seal looks like on these nuts. So I'm going to clean this nut out, make sure this track is all cleaned out, nice and free of debris. I'll put a little bit of grease in there just to help seal up things so water doesn't get in there and intrude inside the ram itself. And then I'll put the new seal, just kind of to put them in. You just simply push it in there and kind of work yourself all the way around until it pops back into place and seats. Would be just like that if it wasn't the old seal. And that is how you set this up for being able to reassemble it. So now you can see what it looks like down here in the hole. So you got your threaded part on the outside. That's where the gland nut goes on there. Then you got this nice shelf right there. That is where your packing all rides. So we're going to make sure that gets all cleaned out where it should be. And then right below that you have your ridge where the packing all stops. So that's what we're going to work on right here, is we're going to clean all this out, get that ridge all cleaned up. So that will be all ready to go to be put back together. So now we got a little bit of grease on the outside. I know they say sometimes grease and hydraulic fluid, which is transmission fluid, doesn't exactly get along with together. But we're not putting a crap load of grease on this. We're just putting a light skin layer on there just so it actually gets in there and stays and gives something to give it started with. So just like differentials and things like that, you put it together. I always put a little bit of grease on there just because it helps keep everything running and lasting longer. So I'm going to get right in there, get it started. Sometimes they're a little bugger to get going in there. And then once you get it going, get your gland nut on there as well. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a bugger to get started. A few taps of the light hammer, seat it down, start getting it threaded down. That helps everything seat down there and there real nice. And that's where you go from there. And once you put it in there, we just tighten it down lightly till it stops. We don't crank on it too hard, because if you crank down too hard, that compresses this packing, which puts more pressure on the actual cylinder itself and the ram. So if you had leaking, you could actually pack it down a little bit tighter and stop the leaking. The problem is when you put it in drift mode, it won't collapse on its own because you had too much stress on there. So that's one thing you do when you test it and put it back together, is make sure you have this just as tight as you need to be without being too tight and setting that. So I'm going to work that down in there and get this on there as well, because they're all new, so it's going to be a little bit tight, but it will go on there, and we'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Some taps with a nice dead blow hammer, so it's getting it seated down there real nice. Then once it's ready to take threads, we'll be able to get it set down in there with our big wrench. So we'll just keep working on it and tapping it until we can really start pressing those back in there nice in there and tight. So dead blow hammer does actually work out okay for setting these in there without damaging the seals. Now that we've got the gland nut, we just ran it down until it just snugged and just kind of just a little bit, just to put a little bit of pressure on there. So we'll verify that once we actually get it fully installed in the truck. So next we're going to do is we're going to actually do this motor so we can get inside here, because we're going to take this motor off, replace it, and then on the inside we're going to change the suction filter. So bolts on both sides right here, just two simple bolts, 5/8 inch wrench, which the box side does fit. Sometimes you run into issues where you got to use the open end side of it. So 5/8 inch wrench, because these are 7/16 bolts. Pull them off on both sides. We'll pop this motor right off. Now we got these bolts out, you want to check to make sure that they're all good, because I know this is a little bit of a rusty head, which is fine, but down here you can see all that corrosion in the threads. That means moisture is getting down there in the hole. So these solenoids ground through this pump, and everything's got to ground out internally. So you want to make sure all the grounds are good. So if these bolts are rusty and really nasty looking, you want to clean them up with a wire wheel or replace them, because that's just not good for making sure the electronics and everything work properly on these motors. So this does have a ground stud. Some actually ground at the base, so it depends on what motor you have. So you want to make sure that's all clean and clear. So now we're going to take our, broke that free. We're going to pull it straight up over the top. So this is the motor itself. So on motors, there are two different styles depending on which generation, which model you have. So the new style is one that actually has the cone and the bearing shaft that actually helps support the actual bearing itself and the shaft that spins around for the pump. So that's why it has that nose. The old style just is a motor with a flat surface and then a drive fork. And some of those had a spacer in there as well to converge and make sure everything worked the same. But that is how you tell the difference between a new and an old style, was the motor itself. If it has that cone to it, it is the new style. If it doesn't have that, it's the old style. So it does matter on those which ones you get. But once we get that off, that goes out of the side. And then you can see down here inside the pump itself, this is what it looks like inside the pump housing. We got some debris, some stuff in there from the previous. But this is the shaft for the motor. That's what spins and does the work. And right down there at the bottom is the suction filter itself. That simply just pushes on a stud. So you take a screwdriver, pop that out, and you can replace the stud with a new one. So down here, I'm looking at my seals. See all this dirt and debris is right here? That's not a good sign. That means moisture and dirt was actually able to get pretty far into this motor, or if not, that was what was coming out with the seal. And that's just a lot of garbage that's actually floating around inside that pump itself. So that's not good. I don't like to see that. So we're going to make sure this gets all cleaned out very well on the inside. Get as much dirt and debris as we can out. So this right here is the suction filter. This is what prevents all the dirt and debris from getting sucked into the pump. So this actually has quite a bit of debris and material in it. So a little bit of metal shavings throughout it. So that's okay because it's catching it. Problem is that means there's a bunch of stuff in there. So this one we're not going to reuse because it's only a couple dollars for a new one. And this is what the new one looks like. So you got a nice clean filter screen itself. So it simply just goes on a stud. You kind of slip it back in there and pop it right back on. And it's good to go. So we're not going to reuse this because it is full of dirt and debris. But we got this nice clean one right here. So we're going to get the new one on, clean all this out, and we'll start getting ready to put back together. as a mention, some of these actually have a magnet installed in them to catch all the metal shavings that float around. So this one's just stuck to the side of the pump itself. But this is a magnet, so you want to make sure this gets cleaned out, just like you do with oil pans and transmission pans. So make sure that gets cleaned out, and we'll stick it back in there right along the side of the pump, like it was before. See right there, it's not going in there, so we're going to turn, oh, there it drops right in. And there we go. Now we've seated it in there, and now we can put our bolts in. So just like that, you just want to make sure you drop it in the right spot. You're not trying to force it. It was obviously pretty obvious with that. So once we put the bolts in, we'll tighten them back down with our wrench, and then we'll move on to the bottom because the bottom seal is leaking as well. So the next one we're going to do is this. This bottom bracket, believe it or not, actually has an O-ring seal on the bottom, and that does leak. Ask me how I know. So what we're going to do is just simple, and also if this ever breaks or cracks, it's replaceable, so it's not just a part of one-piece housing. So 1/2-inch bolts on each side. We're just going to take it and break it free. Comes out pretty quick and easy. And that's what we're looking at right there. Keep getting that off, because see how it's spinning free right there? That's where it was leaking. So now we got all the bolts out. That one fought me a little bit. I'm not sure why it fought so hard. I know this is aluminum case, so my guess is the last person cranked it in there a little bit too hard, because this seal may have been leaking for them at one point. So they just cranked it down a little bit harder. So that's an O-ring. You see that's got a little bit of moisture in there, because this hole right here is the very bottom of the ram. So if there's any dirt and debris that comes in through that wipe seal, like I had all that dirt and debris inside of my case, that's because that wipe seal was so bad from that being pitted, it just let everything keep coming in. As it kept retracting, all the dust, dirt, things like that, all just kept being circulated inside the case. So this does collect and catch some of the stuff. This did have quite a bit of brown in there. But this O-ring did blow apart. So now I'm gonna have to find a new O-ring, put it in there, and then reattach it there. And it'll be good to go. One thing to note, this thing is staggered. So it is staggered and it is different offset. So it only goes on there one way, because if you put it in the wrong way, everything's gonna be crooked. So you gotta make sure you put it back in the same way it goes. But this is what it looks like. So we're gonna clean this up, put a new O-ring in there, bolt it back up, and then we'll paint it and we'll be done. Now I did have another O-ring sitting around, so all I gotta do is take that O-ring, put it right back up there, because obviously that's the way it was. So this is the right size, because it is thick enough where it will compress when it's on there. So that's to be perfect for it. I'm going to put a little bit of grease across this seal just to make sure it's all good and tight. I cleaned up the bolts. They cleaned up nice. All the threads are still looking good. So I'm just going to make sure they chase back in there nice and clean. Just like this. So that one that was fighting me might have had a little bit of debris in there from things like that. So it does fight in there a little bit. So I'm going to make sure that's all clean. And we'll put it back together. So I'm sure most knows what happened here. So we're just cranking it down the last little bit. Wasn't even going that tight. And then, pink, head popped off. So obviously it took some stress cracks from the previous owner. Maybe it's just worth replacing the bolts when you do yours. But vice grip's on there, because it's not, there's no nut on the bottom. It's not bottomed out. So vice grips can back it out nice and easy. Not too much effort. I'll dig through the bolt bin, see if I can find some new bolts. But there it is, sheared right off. So we're gonna get a new bolt for it. And then we'll put that back on there and try again. Now that we've got that headache mess out of the way. So now what we've done so far is we've replaced the motor. We replaced the inner strainer and cleaned out the system, cleaned the magnet. We've replaced the ram. We replaced the wipe seal. We replaced all the packing that is within the ram. And then we did replace this seal right here because that was leaking as well. So that is everything that is on this that can leak. So you always want to make sure you clean this ram, make sure you have a good ram, make sure the seals are all good so debris and dirt doesn't get in there as well. So all that's left is the hydraulic solenoids and things like that. So this valve body's been working good for me. We're not going to open that up today because that would be an entire video in itself because there's just so much going on there. There's a lot of pressure, spring sets, things like that. So we're not actually going to even open it up. So underneath this cover, you have your valves, these valves like this. So the 3 different types of valves in these. You got a 2-way, a 3-way, and a 4-way. So this is one of the 4-way valves that are on these. So it's just simply a valve. And inside this is a little shuttle that moves back and forth. And you have these coils that operate that shuttle that's inside there. So the coil just goes over top of the shaft, a little nut holds it in place. And when these are energized, it will pull that shuttle open to allow fluid to flow through this. So I have a package of 3 different solenoids and 3 different valves. So if anytime this valve pack fails on me, I can just start swapping them out and going because if one does fail, it does have certain symptoms to go with it. So I like to keep these on hand just for in case of emergency because when they fail, you kind of need them. So that is all there is to it for rebuilding this and taking care of this system. So now I'm going to clean this up and paint it, and I'm going to fill it once I get it back on the truck. To fill these, you have your fill port right there. There's also your vent port. So you unscrew that, and that's where you add the fluid in. And on the other side, you've got this port right there. On the very bottom of your drain, make sure that's put in. You take this off and let that be open. So when you're putting fluid in this, when it comes out that, you are full. That's all there is. That's all it takes. You can fill it in from this port if you want to as well. Just make sure you take that cap off there so it vents, so it's easy to pour the fluid in there. So if you have like a bottle or a squeeze pack, it goes in there. So it works out pretty nice. So these are pretty simple systems to work with. I like them just because it's simple 3 valves and there's no extra wiring. And I have mine on just a regular 4-wire harness that I made myself. And there's nothing else to them. They are pretty simple systems to go with. So this was just a late night in the garage helping get this thing ready to go for the season. So pretty simple, a few hours worth of work, but we covered pretty much everything that's going to go wrong with this pump and this system as it goes throughout the season. So hopefully you can like the video, comment, tell us what you think, tell us what you hear about, and subscribe. We got a lot of great content coming, a lot of great content on the channel, so be sure to check it out. And remember to have a great adventure.